Empezamos, buenas tardes ya, porque ya son las 1:45, y bienvenidos a esta sesión del Congreso de ACPEL. Y en primer lugar quiero empezar dándole las gracias a José María Montero por el honor que me hace de que yo pueda estar con ustedes hoy aquí y además presentando algunas distinguidas personalidades. Hoy me toca en esta mañana presentarles al doctor Justus Wesseler. Voy a hacer la presentación primero en español y luego haré un resumen en inglés y luego él ya hará su presentación y posteriormente pasaremos al turno de preguntas que ustedes tengan a bien hacerle. El profesor Justus Wesseler es profesor de la Universidad de Wageningen y que está en los Países Bajos, y realmente es uno de los líderes mundiales en economía agrícola y en políticas rurales. Actualmente el profesor Wesseler ocupa la cátedra de Economía Agrícola y Política Rural en la prestigiosa Wageningen University and Research en los Países Bajos. Es una de las instituciones más influyentes en el mundo de la sostenibilidad y la bioeconomía. El profesor Wesseler se formó en la Universidad de Göttingen, en Alemania, y ha dedicado su carrera a investigar sobre cómo las cadenas de valor pueden impulsar la sostenibilidad y cómo las nuevas tecnologías y las regulaciones transforman el sector agroalimentario. Y sus trabajos han sido publicados en numerosas revistas científicas y libros de referencia. Además, su liderazgo le ha llevado a presidir el International Consortium on Applied Bioeconomy Research, una red global que marca tendencias en la investigación aplicada a la bioeconomía. Y ahora a leer la breve presentación en inglés y a partir de ahí pues ya le doy la palabra. The professor Justus Wesseler holds the chair in Agriculture, Economics and Rural Policy at the Wageningen University, the Netherlands. He has a degree in Agriculture, Environmental and Natural Resources Economics from the University of Göttingen in Germany. His research work is on bioeconomy, economy and policies. The major focus is on the contribution of value chains to improve sustainability and the impact of new technologies and regulations in the value chain in this respect. His research work has been widely published in peer-reviewed journals and books. He's the president of the International Consortium of Applied Bioeconomy Research, and he has been involved in several small and large-scale international research projects as team member and or coordinator, and has been invited to serve as an advisor in academia, policy, and researcher. Professor Wesseler, the floor is yours. Welcome to Alcalá de Henares.
Yes, thank you very much for this very nice introduction. And it is a great honor to present you today with some of the research that I have conducted together with a number of colleagues over the past decades. When Jose Maria was inviting me to this conference, I first had to look it up. So for me, the organization was not yet known, but I must say it's quite impressive what you are doing, and in particular that you are also collaborating with a number of esteemed scholars around the world. Jose Maria was asking me to talk about economics of hunger, of zero hunger. So I had to think a little bit deeper into what my research directly or indirectly has to do with zero hunger. I never have addressed this issue of zero hunger directly or explicitly in my research, but there are definitely direct and indirect links when we look at zero hunger and the research that I and many other people have done in the field that I am active in. Now, most of you are familiar with Joe Stiglitz and his latest publication, and the contribution of well-being and freedom, we say, go hand in hand. And we know as economists that these freedoms depends on opportunity sets that people have. And these opportunity sets are also influenced by hunger. And if people observe hunger, that reduces their opportunities, their opportunity sets. And that's why also for economists, it's important and interesting to work on zero hunger and the economics of zero hunger, because it has substantial wider economic implications. Now, when we look at hunger, we would look also at first of how much food basically is available. And this here are data from FAO, and they show the availability of kilocalories per day for different regions in the world. If you aggregate these numbers over the whole world and then divide this by the population that is living, then basically in practice we should not have a problem. There is enough kilocalories being produced. But the issue is, and this what the lines here are showing, is that in some regions like Africa and Asia, the supply of kilocalories is much lower than in other regions of the world. And that is causing the problem. Not that we don't produce enough, but the availability to have enough is not equally distributed around the world. And for example, look at this undernourishment map by FAO, which indicates where we observe undernourishment. We have here Africa, we have Southeast Asia, parts of Latin America. I have heard that this morning there was a presentation on measuring hunger. Maybe this map may look with the new indicators a little bit different, but the countries that we see here, that would not change that much, I'm quite convinced. Now, if we go beyond hunger and look at wider issues related to food security, this here is a map of food insecurity, and then we get a more deeper understanding that it is not only just looking at the kilocalories that have to be available, but also taking into consideration other aspects with respect to food. Now, another issue that is also very important, and we have here people that have researched on this in detail, that is what we call hidden hunger. That is micronutrient deficiencies that we do not capture when we just look at kilocalories. And if we take these micronutrient deficiencies also into consideration, then even the spread of people and regions being affected will be larger. And then if we look at what is called the global hidden hunger map, taking all these issues into consideration, then we see that this problem of hunger is food security is much more widely distributed than many of us would think about. And that, again, referring back to Stiglitz, addresses is also then important from an economic perspective. So it might be more economically relevant than some of the data would tell us. And that's why economists should pay attention to this. And many of you are perhaps familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. And then the second goal is to achieve zero hunger and to improve food security, nutrition, and to promote sustainable agriculture. We are all aware that achieving zero hunger on its own will never be possible. Right? There will always be something that is causing issues why people do not have enough to eat. Just look at the military conflicts that we are observing today. And we can expect that in one or the other way, such kind of conflicts will also be there in the future in 2050 or 2060. They might be different than they are today. So from that perspective, it might be difficult if you just use this as an absolute term, zero hunger. But of course, with what we have, we should try to see what we can do with the means that we have available to achieve this objective. Now, we have to look at zero hunger also with respect to the developments that we are observing in general. For example, the increase in population. So the estimates that it might be between 9 or 10 billion in 2050. Now, if we use this and look at the consumption patterns that we observe today, that implies studies vary. There are different methods being used, that about 60 to 100% our food supply has to increase. And that is substantial, as this then also relates to other issues that are go hand in hand with food supply. And in particular, that this may increase the pressure on the environment. And that on top of this, if we have the objective to feed the population also in 2050 and have zero hunger, then we have to also consider that there might be pressures, for example, related to climate change that we need to address. And taking this together, this is a substantial challenge then for sustainable development. Now, there is in the SDG statement also looking at sustainable agriculture. Now, this here is an example that refers to the European Union strategy, the Farm to Fork strategy, which should contribute to climate neutrality and food security by 2050. Now, colleagues have done a study. When you look at the farm to fork policies, that includes reducing nitrogen fertilizer use, to reduce plant protection agents such as pesticides and more, what that may imply with respect to greenhouse gas emissions. Now, it would be great for the European Union. With the implementation, there we would have a decrease in greenhouse gas emissions of about minus 110 million tons in carbon dioxide equivalents. But if Europe produces less, population is increasing, someone has to produce more if we do not want to make the situation worse than it is today. So through this, then you have what economists call leakage effects, because in other regions of the world, food production has to increase, and there climate or greenhouse gas emissions may increase. Then we may have other direct effects through land use change and forestry, contributing another 50 million carbon dioxide equivalents. Then if we add this up, then we go down from minus 110 to minus 11 million tons in carbon dioxide equivalent savings. Not including, as the authors explicitly stress, that we also have leakage effects related to land use change and forestry, which they could not assess or quantify due to data problems there. And they conclude that if we take this into consideration, then this would result in an increase in greenhouse gas emissions and not a decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. So the message to take home from this is, so we have to be very careful with implementing new ideas in agriculture production, such as under the farm to fork strategy, and what the implications for sustainable development may imply. So basically, what this requires, if we really want to improve also sustainability, is that we need new solutions that allow us to improve the production of the goods and services that we have an interest in. And here, this is an example from the European Commission, where they looked at the linkages between research and development and the contribution to different sectors within our economy. And we now talk about the bio-based economy, not only using natural resources for producing food, feed, and fiber, but also for other products, for example, in the chemical industry, biodegradable plastics or alternative to fossil fuels to be better able to address the challenges that we are facing. Now, most of these new solutions that we are looking for, they depend on modern biotechnology. This is one of the key issues for being able to achieve improvements. Now, these are examples on the use of genome editing in plant production. That is from the EU SAGE database. When we look here at the traits that are currently under, that are currently maybe out of power. Then we see that, for example, traits related to biotic stress tolerance, they have more than 200 that are currently under development. Traits related to increased plant yield and growth are also above 200. Now, if we look at, in total, we observe that the research has been published on 77 plants, which is much more of research that we observe when we just look at the composition of the plants that we observe in, for example, in older technologies such as transgenic crops. Now, if we look at crops itself, selected here the staple crops, so a lot of research is going on in rice, about 311, which is followed then by maize, wheat, then barley, cassava, banana, and sorghum. Now, who are the researchers that are involved? So you see that about 790 of the research is coming out of Asia. One has to consider that in this data set that they produce there will be double counting. They look at the science publications, and there might be people, for example, from China as well as from the Netherlands and the United States. Nevertheless, this gives us an overview where the research is going. And if we look at the top 10 countries, China so far is the most leading country with about 580 publications, and followed by the United States. And then we have South Korea, Japan, France, UK. What is also interesting to observe that Africa is also on the map, and that is for further development of these technologies and for sustainable development also extremely important. Now, aside from the plants, there are other possibilities for addressing sustainability related to the increase in food supply that will be needed. And that is, for example, substituting animal-based products with plant-based products. Other possibilities are to produce meat products based on cell cultures. We have the possibility also to use insects to produce proteins that we need for human consumption or for animal feeds. And the efficiency of insects for producing proteins is much higher than the efficiency of other plants. And they need less energy, they need less basically protein, less inputs to convert this into a protein if we, for example, compare this also with meat products. Another important issue is also aquaculture. The expectations of demand in aquaculture is that this will increase substantially, almost by 60 to 7% on top of what we have today. And that will again be a challenge for the environment. But there also we have developed new solutions have been developed, what is called closed farming. And this may then contribute to further address these issues. Now, all these developments you're all familiar with, that they are not uncontroversial. Right? If there would be no debate about this, if everybody would be agreeing on these issues, that, well, they should reach a market pretty fast. But experience tells us that in particular, when we talk about modern biotechnology, there's a lot of debates about this. And then there are arguments being made. Yes, you don't know how risky these new products will be, and in that sense, we should behave very careful and perhaps even not even introduce them, right? And then it's going back, and we are sitting here in the church, right? That was very important for Christianity, is that, well, given an unknown but non-zero probability of God's existence and the infinity of the reward of an eternal life, the rational option would be to conduct one's earthly life as if God indeed exists. So we cannot prove that he does not exist. So it's better to behave as if he would exist. That we should avoid that risk. That is a Pascal's wager. Well, it seems to make sense, but then there is many God's objections, where you cannot exclude that God does not exist, but you can also not exclude that another deity like Odin exists. And if you follow as God, according to God, you might be punished by Odin on that. So this line of reasoning is not logically consistent. And that is the major message that we get out of this. Now the question then is, how do we then handle the uncertainties and imperfection in knowledge that we observe, in particular from an economic point of view? Now, there have been a number of publications on how to address these issues. And for example, Arrow and I published a paper in 2012 on intergenerational well-being, the genuine investment model. And basically what they are arguing is that, well, we should assess these technologies, and in the end, it should not result that over time we observe a VT that would be negative. That should be our assessment criteria. Now, we can translate this then into applicable models and include the issues that are related to uncertainty, and in particular to uncertainty and irreversibility, as we always have to think uncertainties and irreversibilities in the context. If we have uncertainty and only reversibility, we don't have a problem. We observe later, okay, was not a good decision, we move back to the initial state, no costs being made. Uncertainty becomes important if there are some of these costs of the failures that we are making that are irreversible, that we cannot reverse back. And this you cannot exclude. But what we can do is to develop models that look into the threshold level of this uncertain, irreversible cost that we should be willing to accept. And then if you use real option methodology, this is what this model is based upon, look at the additional social incremental reversible benefits. There might be irreversible benefits as well. And then we can identify this threshold level. This I star here is the maximum incremental social tolerable irreversible costs. And they should not be passed. And then we can use these models, because the other parts of the model we are often able to well identify with our general equilibrium models, partial equilibrium models, or other tools that we as economists are using. And then we can identify these threshold levels. And this here is an example for a study that we published in 2007. This was related to the introduction of Bt grain maize in the European Union. So we identified what would be the benefits, for example, for France, about 62 million euros on average per year. So this is a substantial amount. Now, we included the irreversible benefits. They were not that high, it was about 240,000 euros per year. Then we had this hurdle rate, which comes out of the real option models to take into uncertainty and irreversibility explicitly into account. And then we get the threshold level, the mystics. And then for France, for example, at total it was about 54 million euros. So if we would have an indication that the environmental damages, for example, are more than 54 million euros on average per year for introducing Bt grain maize, then there would be an economic argument for postponing the introduction and wait for more information. Now, if we compare this number with the damages that have been reported, for example, due to pesticide use, etc., which can serve us as a reference level, those damage costs are far, far lower. So we concluded that the threshold level will not be reached if Bt grain maize will be introduced, and that's why immediate introduction from an economic perspective would make sense. Now, if we calculate these numbers on a per capita level or on a level per maize producing farm household, you see on a capita level it was just 19 cents. At farmhouses is 467 euros. So that illustrates the differences, how people may look at this. The farmers will have a strong interest because they gain a lot. The average citizen, if he is concerned, well, it's just 90 cents per year. Okay, for this 90 cents, I'm willing to pay 90 cents for not having the technology being introduced. And that is where we have to be very careful when we come to assessing specific technologies. If we average the benefit over the whole society, then benefits in many cases will be relatively low. And then with that line of reasoning, you could basically block almost every new idea, new technology being introduced in our economies. So that is something that would not make much sense. Now, I was referring already to the real option model that we have used here. Now, if we use real option models and use this very simple investment model that many of you are familiar with, and we have here an investment I, and then we have here the Marshallian line, and then we have here the option values of this investment, then the theory tells us that the threshold level for immediate investment is larger than under the standard cost-benefit analysis. That is well known. Now, the issue is that if we, for example, change regulations, making them more stringent, we get a downward movement here, considering that these regulations are considered by those who invest as sunk costs. Then the threshold levels again increase substantially. And again, 1 unit of additional regulatory costs then needs again more than 1 unit of benefit to compensate for this. And that's why regulation can have a very costly, so to say, if you want to provide access to new technologies. Now we have refined this model in more detail, developing a supply chain here from R&D to approval, marketing phase, potential exposed liabilities, assuming that the length of these periods, the length is uncertainty, so this kappa 1 follows a hazard rate function, kappa 2 and kappa 3 as well, and then we solved this model and tried to identify what are the effects on immediate investment. Well, these numbers are shocking. So, for example, this result here, if we have a 10-year research phase and a 10-year approval phase, which is something that we observe in agriculture products, a 10-year market length phase, and ex-post liability, then we get a threshold level of 14.59. So for each unit of benefits, for each unit of costs, you need 14.59 units of benefits for compensation, that it will be interesting to invest immediately. Now, if these timelines go down, like R&D goes down from 10 to 5, ceteris paribus, the hurdle rate goes down to 10.8. If we use, for example, fast speed breeding, then it goes down to 7.78. We observe similar effects if we reduce the time lengths for approval. It goes down from the hurdle rate down from 14.59 to 7.59, again, ceteris paribus. And if we run just a regression analysis, you simulate values for kappa 1, kappa 2, and kappa 3, we can see what the average effect of, for example, one additional year in R&D would increase the hurdle rate by 0.6. One additional year of approval length that companies face increases it on average by 0.62. So the approval or the phase is the one that at the marginal level matters the most. So speeding up the translation from research and development and approval into application can generate a high level of benefits. And we assess this here, and we use the general equilibrium model that colleagues run at Wageningen University, where we have in these models you have a stock of R&D, and that is translated into the economy. And now we just assume we moved this gamma distribution to the left, meaning to say that the speed of translating R&D into the economy has increased, what the economic implications will be. And then if we just change here, these where we no, come on, okay, on the top line, by only introduced by high income countries, what the economic benefits will be. For example, then for the European Union, the GDP would increase by 0.18%, and if you use welfare indicators, which is wider, they would increase to 1.81. And interestingly also, wages for low-income workers, they would increase by 11.75%. So that was just for the industrialized world. If this would happen all over the world, then we would observe that the benefits would be even larger. So there is definitely a possibility, or the economic benefits from speeding up these developments can be quite substantial. Now, that was looking into the R&D and regulation. Now, these regulations, they also have an effect on what kind of technology one would choose, because it changes the relative economic benefit of technology A over technology B. And for example, this is here again a model using real options. Here we have, in this case, we just model the benefits and the net benefits, so to say, without having any regulation in the model, and just assume that, okay, in that situation for this farmer, it would be beneficial to use this technology that is here to the left, and then here for another farmer, the N farmer, it would be beneficial to choose the N technology. Now we introduce regulations with respect to the introduction of this G technology, and then due to this, the comparative advantage of this of those farmers that would adopt this technology, that will go down. Now, if you then, for example, further introduce liability issues with respect to production of this specific technology, then the comparative advantages even goes further down. Now, what the models show is that the relative effect of having this regulation on technology, again, they can be substantial, and that's why these technologies matter. And then if you look at different legal environments, for example, if you compare the laws that we have in Europe, or if you compare civil law with common law countries, then we also observe there is a differences because their legal systems have an effect also on technology adoption. Now that was on the regulation and the law. Now there's another very important issue, and that is related to technology choice and the political economy. And what we were interested in asking is, we have all these technologies, a lot of scientific information is there available. Still, these technologies are blocked, and decision makers, they are following, or not following, they are still reluctant to approve these new technologies. And we were in particular interested then looking into golden rice, which was developed by Ingo Petraikus and his colleague and Peter Bayer. And that was done in the early 2000s. And then when they had a vitamin A enriched rice variety, which addresses vitamin A deficiency in the population, which is very important still. Around the estimations are that 200,000 children below 8 per year still die due to vitamin A deficiency, not including all the secondary diseases that are related to this for those who are surviving. The costs are enormous. So there was a lot of attention to this, why this would be quite beneficial. And the expectations at the beginning were very high. Greenpeace was not amused. So they called it a golden illusion. So they were claiming that a 2-year-old would need to eat 3 kilograms of golden rice a day to reach a recommended daily intake. Of course, this is nonsense. I mean, that just ignores the reality of how we consume food. Vitamin A, it's not the aspect of golden rice to supply the whole vitamin A that a human needs. They all have already vitamin A. It's trying to reduce the deficiency, so you would get your all vitamin A just from eating rice. You have already other sources. So there was a lot of bullshit and nonsense. And of course, many people got outraged about these kind of statements of Greenpeace, and more than 100 Nobel laureates call out Greenpeace for anti-GMO obstruction in the in developing world. And well, I think we will see this tomorrow by Sir Richard, a presentation about the details on how negatively this may affect the developing world. He was the initiator of this activity. But it's not only if we look at golden rice. So this here is a statement from the African Union. And what they express is that they are just confused by the different messages that they receive. And there is a lack of consensus in Africa, which then has allowed different interest groups to exploit this uncertainty in the negative. Now, why do these groups have it actually so relatively easy to convince policymakers to not introduce a new technology like golden rice and other ones? Now, we looked into this and have a model where we take into consideration the decision maker's concerns about his political career. So would this be endangered? Would I be re-elected if I approve a new technology? Or would the opposite happen? If Greenpeace is organizing the population to go to the streets and protest against the decisions that I'm going to make. So policymakers, they are concerned about this. When you talk with them, you will see this. Now, if we model this, again, having to include uncertainty, otherwise there would be no issue. Then what we observe is that if you 1 unit of increasing uncertainty with respect to the new technology, again needs many more units of benefits to compensate for this increase in uncertainty. So this basically means Greenpeace needs much less money for getting their message across than the other side to get their message across. Now, we looked into the foregone benefits that is caused by stressing this uncertainty, in particular in Africa. And we looked at 3 crops, cowpea, corn, and matoke, and then assessed consumer and producer surpluses. And what we included then as well is what this may mean for food access. And in particular, what we did in this study then, how much extra benefits children would get by having more kilocalories available using the supply of kilocalories. And what we observe here is that through this, you have substantial benefits from reduced stunting. For example, if we look here at the case of Uganda with respect to the matoke banana, the benefits from reduced stunting are larger than the direct producer and consumer benefits. Right? So the health effects that this may have on the population might be even larger than the direct welfare benefits that we are observing. That's why this is so important from an economic perspective to have access to these technologies. And that is often in many studies, unfortunately, ignored. Now, then the question is, having said all this, all the difficulties that we are observing, then what we should do? So how should we as economists respond to this to get research and development being introduced, considering that there are a lot of institutional issues that affect these changes? Now, some of you might be familiar with the model of Hayami and Rutan. They were talking about induced institutional innovations, and they were arguing, right, with institutional change, we can improve technological update, technology development, and vice versa. Technological development can help us to also introduce institutional development. Where this model has been criticized, there are some glitches in these models. It's not an arbitrage-free model, so we economists have some problems with this kind of models. But other models have also been developed. The innovation and production supply chain that has been published by Silberman et al. In PNAS 2 years ago. So they have a model on innovation supply and production supply chain, illustrating how important this is to developing new technologies. And then there's another model that is called the Berkeley model, which Rausser explains in 2024. And what is this Berkeley model about? Berkeley was criticized in 2000. They made a deal with Novartis about $500 million where Novartis got extra rights to new insights that would be developed in biological technology, and they could check on these insights and then select where they would further invest of the ideas or not. So they could just get earlier access to new insights. And then it was criticized by many outside Berkeley for selling the university to the private sector. And what Gordon was saying is that, well, to get this model done, he had to do a lot of work within in Berkeley, and they needed a mind shift there, right? Then, well, we can also exploit private sector, right? And instead of selling ourselves, we can set the terms on how we exchange our ideas with the private sector and even can make money with this. And so that was in 2000s, and the Energy Bioscience Institute in Berkeley is another example. And then the labs that Jennifer Doudna has created there in Berkeley is a third example. Now, what model do we use at Wageningen? Now, our mission is to explore the potential of nature to improve the quality of life, and we work in the domains of food, nature, and people, and addressing the issues. And we have an innovation ecosystem where we work together with a business community, the government, society, well, and then we have at our university the different knowledge institution, and this seems to work relatively well for other university. Now, sorry. Other models that have been introduced are the so-called helix models that came out of Stanford University. So they talk about the triple helix: academia, private sector, and public sector to work together. Then they add society, so you get this quadruple helix, which becomes already quite complex. And now we already talk about the quintuple helix model by also including the environment. And if you look at these models, the complexity even further increases. But what this tells us, that if you have these models, that we have to develop ideas and strategies that improve to get new technologies that we are developing basically into application. And here in the European Union, many of us are familiar with the technology readiness levels of different products that we are developing. And the question is, how can we speed up these technologies and avoid that they will be blocked? So to finalize, reducing hunger increases opportunity, and that's why it's also of extreme relevance for economists. And technological change is extremely important. But the technological change also depends on the institutions, and is the norms and values that we observe in the environment, and then the regulatory regimes and legal regimes that result out of it. But we also observe, even with what we would call good institutions, regulations can kill and may not result in the changes that we would love to have. We need these institutional and regulatory changes, but these are more difficult to reach than the technological changes, and it deserves for us economists and are working on this much more attention. And we have to think more about how can we develop innovation ecosystems that are incentive compatible. Now I want to finish. If you want to know more, as it was mentioned, I'm the president of the ICABR, and we have our annual conference next month in Saskatoon, and then next year our 30th anniversary conference, and that will be at the lovely place of Ravello, Italy. So thank you very much for your attention, and happy to take questions and comments if you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for this very comprehensive talk that you just gave us. I'm not an expert, so I may say anything that you say, what is this woman saying? But completely agree with all you said. I learned a lot today. My idea is that, well, I have first one question, because I was so surprised by the low level of research coming from Europe. That's something that just surprised me, that it was China, US, and then some countries. And also we are so concerned, apparently so concerned from the European institutions, but then we don't have any research. I suppose that there are funds that are going to research in these areas, but we don't apply them or something like that. That is just one minor question. And then an issue that okay, any model is and should be criticized, and we do that always. So that's part of the game. But one issue that happens in all the areas is that we are risk adverse, and that there are always people who have earnings from the current situation. So you have some easy money coming from some areas, and to invest in these areas is going to be revenues for the long term, and even not for that company, for other companies. So that is some issue that really bothers me, how to conceal the short term where people need to eat now and to have revenues now, and the long term. That's something that I never know how to conceal them. That's my question.
Yes, thank you. Very important question. Now to the research that we observe in plants. So this is only plants. It doesn't include medical research, for example, where also Europe does a lot. But it also shows on that, for example, China and why China is so strong, as they immensely invested in public research on genome editing. That was a strategy decided by the Chinese government. And that makes it different to what we observe in Europe and in the United States. We have there also research support from the public sector in these areas, but it is not as strongly and dedicated with a specific strategy as China has. Europe tries to change this, right, under the bioeconomy strategy. We have to wait and see how this then in the end plays out, and if Europe will be able to catch up with other regions of the world. Now, yes, you're absolutely right. All models are wrong. There is simplification from reality. And one of the issues is definitely is related to power distributions, and then, for example, how do you consider then that if you have a new company like Bayer or BASF, right? They invest in this new technology. Are they not exploiting then the farmers because they have the power? Definitely. That to a certain extent might be true. We have to consider that for justifying the investments, we have to give them for a period of time some monopolistic rights. Otherwise, it will be difficult for them to regain the investments. Now you could say, yeah, why should the private sector do this? Should this not be then done by the government sector, by the public sector, right? So that these monopolistic profits may not be gained. Well, history tells us public sector is good in many things, but not necessarily in the things where they should produce products, right? History tells us that is better left to the private sector, where we have to accept that, yes, there will be monopolistic grants being generated. But that is a situation better than not allowing the private sector to go into this. We can debate whether or not the rules and regulations that we have with respect to giving monopolistic rights there, for example. So this is normally done via the patenting systems. How good are the patenting systems? Right? There have been a lot of debates about patents, and in particular sharing the new ideas with others. But when we look into the literature on this, when we look at, for example, Berkeley, what Broad Institute is doing, and Chrissy, Richard knows this very well. I mean, he's involved in this business as well, that through licensing and other activities, the access to this new technology is more widely distributed than many of us are thinking about, right? Well, there's a debate about how open or disclosed these agreements that are made with respect to licensing agreements, etc. Their government can play a role to make this less constraining to the different actors being involved and more. So yes, that plays an important role. Now, if we look at, for example, Africa, etc., I think it's very important that in particular African countries invest in these new technologies themselves. We observe that if the technology comes from Europe, there's internal resistance also within the African countries. A nice example is a cowpea, which has been developed by African research institution, and that went through the approval process so fast we were really surprised. Maize was not approved, BT maize. It started in the mid-1990s and is not yet approved. The cowpeas went through the approval system within 3-4 years.
Thank you very much for this amazing presentation. It's holistic. You tackled many dimensions and angles. However, I would like to see if you can kindly model or create a model to measure the impact of misinformation, not to name it ignorance, on amplified by international activists such as the Greenpeace, which is unfortunately shaping, the public opinion and thus affecting policymakers or reinforcing policymakers' hesitance. So, is it possible really to model ignorance and misinformation directly, just to see the impact of this on that? And in my opinion, this is incredibly blocking everything related to innovation in technologies and their transformational potential impact on people's life and specifically on hunger.
Yeah, Vivian, many thanks. This is, of course, a very important question, and then how to model this. So basically, this is what we did here in this study. So what we were doing is looking into technologies that are available for the market. We did the same in our golden rice study. Golden rice is there. These technologies are basically there. They need to be introduced. But due to the political environment, that policymakers are not willing to go for it. You may call it ignorance. Is one part of this. The political economy literature tells us also, being afraid about the stakes that you may lose if you go for the decision making of this policy. And then we calculated how large the costs are. So that is here for a cowpea. If you delay this by 10 years, then the foregone consumer surplus is about 82 million euros per year. And then the total surplus is about 123 million euros per year. And that is how we can put an economic number behind this. How powerful, from an economic perspective, the opposition to these technologies is in economic terms. And this is a negative number, so to say, because this is foregone benefits. So we call that, why we call our paper, the economic power of the golden rice opposition.
First of all, thank you for your commitment in the fight with hunger. And my question is, how do you think that a university can work together with the private sector, but at the same time to protect its social mission?
Yeah, this is a debate all of us perhaps have at the university. We have the debates at Wageningen as well. So I can more speak about how we deal with this at Wageningen. So we see it as important to work together with the private sector, including also citizens and the private sector, and being extremely transparent about this, about our collaboration, and also highlighting what are the extra benefits that, for example, we from the university will gain, to convince also people that are working at our university that this not necessarily has to be a bad thing, so that this can be a win-win. Now we observe, for example, in sciences, so we talk about, for example, citizen science, right? In particular, when we talk about monitoring biodiversity, etc. This has become a very important tool for also improving the scientific insights. So there has to be a gain on this, right? And that is what we have to explain to the people. And we also have to work together with the government and also considering their views. We depend on the government funding, but we also have to take their interests serious, right? They sometimes would love to know about this and that, and I think we should serve their interests as well, even so if it not necessarily results in a publication in the top economic or other journals, but that should be task of this as well. And then in the Netherlands, we have the advantage that this has been developed over a very long period of time. There is basically general consensus in the Netherlands that this is the way how it should be done, and that also government funding is organized by this. So, but this has developed over time, and I think we are at this stage, and we have to consider it will further develop. But we need more research on this one. Why did this so well work in Wageningen, right? Why does it not may work so well at other places? What does Berkeley make different from Wageningen? What does Stanford, what does Harvard, what do other places make different? And we have to develop strategies, right, to further improve on this. And that needs research. And in particular, economists should spend more time on this innovation ecosystems and also related strategies to better understand this.
Use the privilege of the moderator to have the last one. It's very simple.
It's the most hard one, I guess.
No, it's very simple. You mentioned about new solutions for this problem. And obviously, probably in the future, we will go to McDonald's, Burger King to have a burger with produced with insects, as you mentioned. But my question is that now, with the 3D footprint technology, do you think that is a good option also for create new option for to fight against this problem?
Yes, that is one of the tools, right? So we should make use of all the possibilities that are existing, right? And in particular, these food issues that I was raising might contribute to reduce the negative implications that we will get from increase in food demand to population growth and changes in income in the population. And we should be concerned about this. And then this 3D printing may be one of the things that can contribute. Genome editing can contribute, but there's no silver bullet that can solve all the problems, right? That is what we need to be aware about. We need an institutional environment that allows that these new technologies can reach the market. And that is the most important issue that we have to struggle for.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wesseler. And gracias a todos por la asistencia y nos veremos esta tarde. Un aplauso.